Welcome to the deep dive. It's kind of staggering when you think about communication today, how fast it is, how far it
Oh,
reaches.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We've moved light years from, like, smoke signals, haven't we? Now it's instant global data sharing.
Yeah, sending huge files, connecting instantly across the planet. It's amazing. Faster, easier. Distances just don't mean what they used to.
But it's funny, isn't it? As all that convenience grew, so did our focus on privacy, maybe even obsession with it.
Right, we build up all these digital firewalls, encryption, endless
Mm. All
passwords.
to keep things secure, to keep outsiders out,
Yeah, we think about hackers or maybe companies wanting our data. But the source we're digging into today asks this really unsettling question.
which is,
What if the biggest threat, potentially, to our privacy isn't some outsider, but the very group we trust to protect us, our own government?
that definitely flips the script. And the scale the source mentions
Yeah.
kind of gives you pause.
It really does. Like,
Yeah.
the NSA are reportedly holding, what was it, 5 zettabytes of data?
5 zettabytes. It's almost impossible to comprehend.
5 trillion gigabytes. Just, wow. How do you even wrap your head around that number?
You really can't. And it immediately brings up these huge questions, right? Like, how much of that data is actually vital for safety?
And where's the line? Especially when it involves watching ordinary people, citizens not suspected of anything.
Exactly. And this whole tension just exploded, really, with Edward Snowden back in 2013.
The former NSA contractor leaked thousands of documents.
Yep, showed the world the sheer scale of government surveillance, especially on private communications. It was massive.
And the reaction was instant and incredibly divided.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Overnight, he was painted as,
Yeah.
well, everything. A traitor, a hero, a whistleblower, even a spy, depending on who you listen to.
The labels were all over the place. And that's really what we want to unpack today.
Using our source material as a guide, yeah.
Our mission for this deep dive is to look at how the news media used this thing called framing when they covered Snowden, specifically in that critical year, 2013.
Okay, so framing. Let's get a handle on that concept first. What exactly is it, according to the source?
Well, source pulls from researchers like Robert Entman, and he basically says framing is about highlighting certain parts of reality.
While kind of pushing other parts into the background.
Exactly. And doing that influences how we, the audience, react to the story.
It's like choosing what to zoom in on with a camera.
Yeah.
Right. What's in the frame, what's left out. It changes everything.
Totally changes the picture. And it's not accidental. It guides how people understand things.
Definitely. The source uses a really good example to illustrate this, reporting on a liquor store robbery.
Okay.
So you could use what they call an episodic frame.
Episodic, meaning focused just on the single event.
Right. Just the specifics. Who were the suspects? What race were they? What got stolen? Was anyone hurt? It's just that one incident, like an episode in a series.
And the source says that kind of tight focus often leads people to blame, well, the individuals involved.
Or maybe even groups they associate with those individuals, yeah. It keeps the focus very narrow on personal responsibility or failure.
Okay, so that's episodic. What's the alternative?
The alternative is a thematic frame. This pulls the camera back, so to speak.
Shows the bigger picture.
Exactly. Looks at the context. Are there broader societal issues at play? Economic problems? Trends in the community?
So less this person did this bad thing and more what factors might contribute to things like this happening.
Precisely. And that thematic lens encourages a totally different audience reaction. You start thinking about systems, about society, not just the individual act. It shifts the whole conversation.
That's a really powerful difference. And the source also brings in Irving Goffman's ideas, right, about primary framework.
Yeah, Goffman talks about these almost unconscious lenses we use to make sense of everything. He distinguishes between, like, natural frameworks, seeing things as just happening, like weather.
And social frameworks.
Right, where we see actions as driven by intention, by goals, by some kind of intelligence behind them.
And news outlets, they operate squarely in that social framework zone.
Absolutely. They're not just neutrally presenting facts, they're selecting, arranging. They're telling a story with a purpose, an aim.
And they know who they're talking to. They tailor the story, the frame, to connect with their audience's likely views or values.
It's definitely part of the craft. They understand their audience and shape the narrative to resonate.
And one really clear way they do this, especially with controversial figures, is using that hero or traitor frame.
Yeah, positioning the person or their actions somewhere on that spectrum, often aligning with how they think their audience already feels.
The source gives a historical example, Mordecai Vanunu.
Right, the Israeli technician who revealed details about Israel's nuclear program back in '86. Hugely sensitive stuff.
And the news coverage was like night and day, depending on the outlet.
Completely.
Yeah.
So you take an Israeli paper like the Jerusalem Post, their audience likely saw Vanunu's leak as a deep betrayal.
So they framed him as
A traitor, unequivocally. The source notes they emphasized his harsh treatment, calling it fair payback for his betrayal. They really played up that angle, increased its salience, its importance for the reader.
making sure that traitor idea landed hard.
You got it. Now contrast that with, say, CNN in the U.S. Their audience might have a more positive view of someone exposing government secrets, especially nuclear ones.
So CNN went with hero.
Pretty much. They framed him as a hero. They reported he was embraced by the anti-nuclear movement, highlighted his Nobel Peace Prize nominations.
Wow. Same person, same action, totally different framing based on the expected audience. That really shows the power of it.
It really does. Which brings us right back to Snowden and the source details. When his leaks hit in 2013, bam, instant polarization.
Yeah, you had really strong reactions immediately, like Secretary of State John Kerry.
Straight out with the traitor frame. Said Snowden betrayed his country, needed to man up and come back to face charges. Very clear stance.
But then you had the other extreme, Daniel Ellsberg.
The Pentagon Papers guy. He framed Snowden as a total hero. Called the leak the most important in U.S. history, even more than his own.
High praise. And then there was President Obama, kind of in the middle.
More nuanced, yeah. Obama acknowledged the leaks were damaging, hurt intelligence work, but he also said the debate Snowden started was an important one that we needed to have. So elements of both sides there.
Interesting. And what about the public? Where did they stand? The source mentioned Pew Research data.
Yeah, Pew found the public was really split right down the middle. About 45–50% of both Republicans and Democrats thought Snowden's actions had either served or harmed the public interest. Almost an even divide on the impact of his actions.
Okay, so pretty divided on Snowden himself, but what about the underlying issue, the NSA surveillance programs he exposed?
The Pew data showed a clearer difference. Democrats were significantly more likely to approve of the NSA collecting phone and internet data for anti-terrorism. 58% approval among Democrats.
Compared to
45% approval among Republicans. So Republicans were less supportive of the actual programs Snowden revealed.
Okay, so difference in approval of the programs, even if they were split on Snowden. How did that feed into the study's hypothesis?
Well, the researchers reasoned, okay, liberal outlets like MSNBC, their audience is generally more supportive of these NSA programs.
So they'd likely see Snowden negatively for disrupting them, frame him as a traitor.
That was the hypothesis, exactly. And conversely, conservative outlets like Fox News, whose audience was less supportive of the NSA programs.
They might frame Snowden as a hero for exposing them.
That was the other side of the hypothesis. Fox News leans hero.
And CNN, the one often seen as being in the middle.
They hypothesized CNN would take a more balanced, neutral frame. Not strongly hero or traitor.
Okay, that makes logical sense, linking the expected frame to the audience's likely view on the underlying surveillance issue. So how did they test this? What was the method?
The source says they analyzed 18 video news clips from 2013, 6 clips from each of those 3 networks: Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN.
Chosen because of their different perceived audience leanings, conservative, liberal, neutral.
Right. And then they needed a way to measure the framing in those clips.
How did they do that?
They developed a coding scheme. Basically, they went through the clips and counted words and phrases associated with either a hero frame or a traitor frame.
Okay, like specific keywords.
Exactly. So for the hero frame, they look for positive language. Things like extraordinary, increasing transparency, maybe comparing him to other heroes, calling it a noble act, talking about supporting civil liberty.
Got it. Positive spin on his actions or motives.
Yep. And for the traitor frame, they look for the opposite negative language, words like damaging, harmful, criminal, saying he should be prosecuted, using terms like espionage, theft, warning of a grave threat, or putting lives at risk.
So negative consequences, criminal implications.
Precisely. They tallied these up for each clip.
And then classified the whole clip based on which type of language was more common, hero dominant or traitor dominant.
Exactly right. That let them see the main frame being pushed in each specific segment they looked at.
Okay, moment of truth. What did they find? Did the hypothesis hold up? Did Fox lean hero and MSNBC lean traitor?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because the main finding, analyzing those specific 18 clips, was that the initial hypothesis was not confirmed.
Really? Wow. So it wasn't that neat political split they expected.
Not in this sample, no. What the analysis actually showed was that the majority of the clips they looked at, from all three networks, Fox, MSNBC, and CNN, predominantly used language that pushed a traitor frame for Snowden.
Hold on, all three. Even Fox News, the one they thought might frame him as a hero because their audience disliked the NSA programs more.
That's what this analysis found, yes. For the Fox News clips in this sample, the dominant frame was traitor. They found language like betrayal, damage, talk of a grave threat to our national security, and calls that he must be prosecuted.
Okay, and CNN, the supposedly neutral one.
Also, predominantly traitor frame in the clips they analyzed. Rhetoric like violation of the law, mentioning he was charged with theft of government property.
And MSNBC, they were hypothesized to use the traitor frame.
And they did. The majority of their analyzed clips also fit the traitor frame, using words like espionage and talking about criminality.
So based on this specific sample of 18 clips from 2013, the overwhelming tendency across all three major networks was to frame Snowden as a traitor.
That was the key finding from this particular analysis reported in the source. It's quite striking.
It really is. But the source adds a bit of nuance, right? It wasn't every single clip.
Exactly. That's important. The source is careful to point out that while the majority of analyzed clips lean traitor for each network in this 2013 sample, every network did also produce some coverage that used hero framing, some that used traitor, and some that used more neutral language.
Okay, so it shows the complexity. It wasn't monolithic, but the dominant trend in this snapshot was surprisingly consistent across the networks leaning traitor.
Precisely. Multiple frames can coexist, but one might be more prevalent in a certain time or in certain outlets. And here, in 2013, for these clips, traitor seemed to be that dominant frame.
That's just fascinating, especially given the public was so split and Republicans actually disliked the NSA programs more. What's the big takeaway then? What does this tell us overall?
Well, the main conclusion drawn in the source is pretty clear. Whether the specific hypothesis worked out or not, the study strongly shows that framing is real. It happens.
It's not just academic theory.
Nope. It's an active practice used by major news outlets like Fox, MSNBC, and CNN. They are shaping the narrative through language choices.
And if it's happening with them, it's likely happening everywhere else in the media, too.
That's the suggestion, yes. The source implies it's probably a widespread practice, maybe even more obvious in outlets with really strong political leanings.
No, good research acknowledges its limits. Did the source mention any limitations to this study?
It did. They pointed out, practical things. Analyzing video is time-consuming. So they look at 18 clips total, just 6 per network.
Which isn't a huge number.
Right. They note that analyzing many more clips, maybe 50 per network or covering a longer time frame, could potentially paint a different or more detailed picture. Perhaps the dominant frame shifts over time, for example.
Makes sense. Anything else?
They also acknowledge that the specific way they defined and counted hero versus traitor language, their coding scheme, could be seen as a limitation. Someone else might categorize things slightly differently.
And potentially get slightly different numbers.
Possibly. But, and this is the crucial point the source makes, even if the exact numbers changed a bit with a different method, it wouldn't change the core finding.
Great.
Framing is happening. The choices about language and emphasis are real and they matter.
And this brings it right back to us, to you listening. Why is understanding this stuff, understanding framing, so critical for just watching the news?
Because news isn't just a fire hose of raw facts, right? We rely on it to make sense of complicated stuff, to form our opinions. And framing plays a huge role in guiding that sense-making process.
Yeah, if you're not aware it's happening, you can easily just absorb the viewpoint the outlet is pushing without even realizing it.
Exactly. You think you're just getting information, but you're actually getting an interpretation, a specific angle baked right in.
So recognizing it, noticing the word choices, what's emphasized, what's left out, lets you be a more active participant.
A more critical consumer.
Yeah.
Definitely. You can ask yourself, does this frame make sense with the facts, or does it feel like it's trying to lead me somewhere specific?
So to wrap up this deep dive then, the source materials show that in this specific 2013 analysis, major networks, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, actually all predominantly used a traitor frame for Snowden, despite different audience views on surveillance.
Yep, a surprising result that challenges simple assumptions about media alignment, but confirms the power of framing. And even though that was the dominant trend, other frames were present too, showing the complexity.
And The big takeaway for you, the listener, is that knowing about framing is a vital skill for navigating today's information world.
Absolutely essential.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to chew on, building on the source. Given that we know framing shapes opinion, and sometimes in unexpected ways across outlets, how can you become a more conscious, critical news consumer? How do you make sure your views are grounded in a solid understanding of the facts, and not just unconsciously shaped by the frame somebody else chose?